Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're taking a look at what 2015 may have in store for us. This panel discussion is brought to you by BestTransport, Inc. And before we start, just a quick word or two about BestTransport. We are a software company that provides transportation management software. We've been doing this since 2000. We have a customer base that is broad and diverse in both geography and in the industries that we serve. We come to this with a very deep, multi-decade experience in transportation management, and we're very focused on reducing the cost and risks of your transportation environment, something that I think all of you listening to this today will find of critical importance. For more information, please contact us at info@besttransport.com. You can also learn more about us at www.besttransport.com. So we're going to be talking about the future of 2015 to the extent that we can all prognosticate. And to help us do that, we have a really terrific panel today that I'd like to introduce to you. First, we have Kathy Roberson, who is a senior analyst focusing on the supply chain and the transportation industry worldwide. Prior to that, she spent a number of years at UPS Supply Chain Solutions, where she did analyst work, and she also worked with the contract logistics and freight forwarding groups. So she has a very strong background in just the things that are critically important to those of you listening today. Our second panelist is Richard Hastings. He is a very well-respected and very well-known macroeconomic strategist with Global Hunter Securities. His contact info is here. Mr. Hastings tracks and forecasts a wide range of trends in the major drivers of energy markets, so he'll be having some interesting things to say about fuel. He follows the stock markets and domestic and international economies. He's well known for warnings in 2006 and 2007 regarding the housing market. We all know what happened there, and the financial crisis. And he's a longtime communicator and commentator, I should say, on major TV business news. In particular, he's on CNBC, and his comments frequently appear in CNBC.com, Reuters, Platts, the Wall Street Journal, and other major business channels. Our final panelist is equally distinguished, Albert Safford. He's an internationally known trade compliance and supply chain consultant. He has been doing this for well over 30 years in both international and domestic logistics, transportation management, and supply chain industries. He's provided extensive support, training, and compliance and audit programming for OTI, that's the Ocean Transportation Intermediaries, and he's been a very active member of the NITL Ocean Committee, which regularly works on FMC topics. So with this esteemed panel, I'm going to dive right in and let them share with you their thoughts about the trends and issues that are going to shape 2015. First question, one that's on everyone's mind. Are fuel prices expected to positively or negatively impact transportation costs in 2015? Albert, perhaps we could start with you.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Glad to be here. Honestly, I'm quite neutral on these, fuel prices and developments. Really can't predict what's going to happen. The current decrease certainly is interesting, but I think overall, we need to expect the same as we've had in 2014 in terms of level of cost for fuel, and it's a fixed major component of transportation costs today, and I don't think that will change ever again to any lower levels 15 years ago.
Okay, thanks for that. Richard, anything to add?
Well, the big decline in crude oil prices will drive a very substantial and fast decline in some of the transportation fuels. So the short-term impact from that is beneficial, and that starts to spread through the ground freight transportation And to a lesser degree, hopefully some of it will spread into some of the jet freight express transport of small packages. But on the ground freight side, there should be a positive benefit, assuming that there's no decline in volume of packages and objects being moved around. But what will happen is that the surcharges on the surcharge tables for ground freight that are based on very expensive highway diesel prices, those surcharges start to come down, and that really starts to open up some of the profitability in the supply chain that then gets passed along vertically from a few different layers of the vertical ground freight supply chain. So hopefully that will continue to be the case, and that these lower fuel costs can continue for about 6 to 9 months. If that is the case and you don't have a big decline in volume of stuff that's being moved around, then you really start to get an expansion in the profitability in ground freight, and that spreads right back to the suppliers. Later on, it could even start to spread back to some of the final recipients at the end user side of supply chains, which might mean the consumer later on.
Great, thanks for that. Very interesting. Next question. What capacity trends are you seeing? Are shipments being delayed because of limitations, or is the system managing to flex sufficiently to support? Kathy, perhaps you would like to start.
Thank you, Alan. There's a lot of interest in the capacity, and from an international perspective, a lot of us are aware of what's going on in the ocean freight business, and particularly way too much capacity there. Vessels sitting out there, plus more coming on board, the huge vessels and such as that, which is having an interesting effect on rates, to put it mildly. While air, seeing a shift, somewhat of a shift from the use of cargo to cargo being placed in the bellies of passenger airlines. So there's a shift going on there as well. And when you look at it from a domestic perspective, we know what's going on with trucking. We have the shortage of drivers and the need to find available capacity within that growing market. And with the rail, so much being rail or a combination of rail and truck is also creating somewhat of a capacity issue.
Okay, thanks for that. And Albert, what are your thoughts on that from your perspective?
Well, on capacity trends, I think I concur with Kathy. I mean, we have overcapacity in some areas, and in other areas we have a shortage of capacity. And the shortage certainly extends primarily to the ports and terminals and the access to those facilities. And certainly trucking will continue to be a major challenge in the United States, since we simply don't have enough truck drivers signing up for these currently fairly low-paying jobs. So that, I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge. We're on the other side with the overcapacity on the ocean side. We're pretty much driving larger vessels and then creating the bottleneck at the ports.
Okay, thanks for that. So as kind of a follow-up, are you seeing shippers shift, I apologize, from one mode to others to manage expense and ensure timely movement of goods, given this imbalance? Perhaps you could comment on that as well, Albert.
Well, I think there's certainly on a domestic side with the U.S., I see a continued better use of ground services, truck, and you have LTO, certainly in package services, taking away from air transportation, since ground has become so much more efficient and reliable, and air, obviously, a lot more expensive. In international, I think shifts really just whenever there's a urgent need, like the issues we have currently on the West Coast ports, may have driven a little spike in air freight for some desperate shippers getting some freight to market. But I think generally people are rather trying to plan longer out rather than, let's say, shift ocean to air mode because of the significant cost increase associated with it.
Great. Kathy, are you saying the same thing?
I am, as a matter of fact. I think as far as shifting from one mode to another, you're seeing a good bit of that. Depends on the type of industry as well. Read recently there's a shift from air to ocean pharmaceutical goods. Air freight providers aren't able to handle the special needs of that particular industry. But, I mean, like Alan said, also, with the port situation, to manage expenses, make sure that the goods are moved on time as well is playing a big role in it.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So here's shifting gears and looking a bit globally for a moment. How is the expected economic status, which is generally dubious, for Europe and China going into this year, going from your perspective to impact the global supply chain? Richard, perhaps this is a good place for you to jump in.
There's a problem coming from Asia. The assembly hub for the entire human civilization is really centered in Asia, South Asia and East Asia. So it is that important. The civilization that we've created now relies upon assembly of so many different things in South and East Asia, and we're talking about an absolutely massive amount of population and geography. The critical commodities that are affected by what's going on over there are now seeing prices collapsing. It's really not a good situation. First, we saw that iron ore prices really started to come way down. They're about half of what they were, and now they're close to levels seen during the demand collapse in 2009. And, of course, now we have crude oil prices down almost 50% in about 6 months. Crude oil being the world's single most important commodity, the most influential and pervasive commodity. Unlike iron ore, something like crude oil is made into so many derived petroleum products that go into everything in the world that we're familiar with. So a collapse in commodity prices, iron, coal, and now crude oil, all of those are associated with this flattening out of the growth horizon for the biggest part of the manufacturing universe in the world, and that's South Asia and East Asia. So without that driving this incremental additional demand year after year, well, there's always castable, foreseeable, and quantifiable increase in demand, then all of a sudden the market doesn't really know how to price a commodity, and the commodity price, unlike a stock or something else, it doesn't kind of stop. It just goes straight down. And as is frequently said about a commodity, it doesn't have a dividend associated with it. So when it goes down, it doesn't really have anything to grab the wall on the way down. It just keeps just going straight down until the collapse exhausts itself. So that, unfortunately, is what's going on, is that as they've become more efficient and as the planet has matured and as, the amount of raw materials that are ultimately needed to make certain things. I mean, just as an example, the size of certain electronic components, they're smaller. The weight of them, smaller. I'll give you an example from a personal thing. There's the county recycle dump, so to speak, and it's really a riot to go there because you don't really experience anything like that until you take let's say some home domestic building materials that you want to just get rid of. So I like to take them down there and throw them into these gigantic areas and just see what's going on. They had pallets and pallets and pallets of these old flat screen versions of CRT televisions, cathode ray tube types of TVs, but they were flat screens. These things are enormous. Then there were other newer LCD TVs that are being discarded also. The things are worthless. The amount of size that these things were taking up was astonishing. And now you're taking a smartphone with a little Bluetooth speaker. You're eliminating a lot of other electronic components that used to get built and moved around the planet. So now you're reducing the number of objects that the consumer needs, that they want, the size, the number, and the weight. Well, there you go. So that's going to really start to drive down demand for these critical major classes of commodities. That's partly what's going on. But once the planet sees that the projected growth for demand for these things in East Asia flattens out and then projected to be maybe a little bit less 3 to 5 years out, you wind up with a deflationary spiral like we're starting to get again right now. So some of the short-term things are really beneficial, but then the risk to all of us is that there's a decrease in demand for the volume of materials, and that's where you start to get a problem. We already see it showing up in some of the tanker rates, where the dirty tankers for fuel oil and for crude oil, the rates there have been going up week after week to compensate for the decline in the bunker fuels. But on the dry bulk cargo ships, the rates have been coming right down along with the demand for the commodities, because the volume demand is coming down too. I'll give it back to you, Alan.
Interesting, very interesting. Kathy, what are you seeing out of Europe with that as a backdrop in Asia?
Poor Europe is about all I can say at the moment. They narrowly escaped a recession in the third quarter. What's interesting, what I'm finding in Europe, is that there's a lot of interest in mergers and acquisitions. There's consolidation going on in the market, probably just to survive, to be honest with you. And we're beginning to see more interest in logistics providers wanting to play further in the European market. And the sluggishness is economic. Is driving a lot of this interest, because eventually improve. It's going to be changed like most economic situations tend to do. But other than that, pretty much what's going on. But another interesting thing that's going on as far as this whole economic sluggishness, a shift in trade lanes. We've traditionally, it's always U.S., Europe, Asia focused. We're now looking at shifts, a lot of interest in Africa, Asia to Africa and vice versa. So a lot of that is there's a lot of interest in that as well.
Great, very interesting. So if nothing else, we know we're in for a very, very interesting and possibly very different 2015. So let's shift gears a little bit. With some of that as a backdrop, Albert, perhaps a good place to start with you. Are we seeing governments doing anything to facilitate the movement of goods across borders?
I don't see any major changes coming forward. I mean, some governments of economy-driven countries or regions certainly are doing their best to facilitate legitimate trade, pushing out the authorized economic operator, the AEO programs. But overall, I think any international movement of goods by any mode will continue to be more cumbersome, more time-consuming, higher risk when compared to domestic transportation. And there are many examples out there. Shipments just randomly are held up in customs or for security matters, inspections, and all these things. And I think global terrorism or the threat of continued global terrorism simply won't, give a lot of opportunities for governments to facilitate easier movement of cross-border transportation.
Very good. So I guess on a related note, and I might as well stick with you for just a moment. Are you seeing anything here within North America or between the states that may have an impact? Kathy, any thoughts on this topic?
As far as NAFTA and changes in NAFTA,
Yeah, are you seeing any issues that are going to impact any of our cross-border, either between NAFTA or, for that matter, just in interstate commerce? Any regulations coming down?
to be honest with you, I think there's still a big interest in the whole NAFTA. It keeps growing. The automotive industry, you're seeing a lot more of the auto manufacturers moving into Mexico. So, if anything, we're going to see just a continued increase of trade. But as far as any type of rulings, regulations and such, I haven't seen anything of recent.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, here's an interesting topic that's come up because it's been such a slow motion activity with all the development work. But with the Panama Canal getting close to being reopening, is there going to be an impact that may ripple through overland shipping behaviors? It may impact distribution centers. Is it going to change capacity? We touched on that a little bit earlier in a more general sense. Albert, thoughts?
Well, great. Yeah, there's a lot of obviously discussion around the Panama Canal, the reopening the larger Panama Canal, as you mentioned. I'm here in South Florida, so there's a lot of anxiety about it. I think more is hype than reality, because at the end of the day, the beneficial cargo owner, the shipper, will look at transit time and cost, and that's how they're going to decide, what mode or what route they're going to pick. And if I'm in Tampa today as an importer or exporter, it really doesn't matter, and I import or export to and from Asia, I'm going to have faster transit time, even with the port delays we're currently experiencing on the West Coast, and lower cost to go truck, rail, and then ocean mode across the Pacific, rather than going ocean or water through the Panama Canal onto, let's say, East Coast, whether the vessel comes into Miami, Port Everglades, Jacksonville. I mean, as an example, it doesn't matter. The cost is just significantly higher when you look at a port-to-door cost, and then the transit time is longer. So I think Panama Canal expansion is good for carriers to rationalize maybe services, but from a shipper perspective, I don't think it's going to make a big change unless the ocean, port-to-port cost to the East Coast ports, such as Miami or Jacksonville, will be considerably lower than what they are today. And I don't see that happening at all at this point.
Richard, what do you think?
Well, I think that this is the Panama Canal widening and deepening is important to make it much easier for LNG, liquefied natural gas vessels, to move from the Gulf Coast of the United States towards, hopefully, their destinations in Korea and especially Japan over the next 20 years, which is the way those LNG contracts work. They're very, very long-term, agreements. Assuming that Panama Canal, provides the solution that occurs along with agreements on supply from those that are making LNG available for loading down in the terminals in the Gulf Coast, then it shortens the trip. It makes it possible to allow a better long-term agreement to come into focus for LNG, and that in turn makes the long-term production of natural gas in the United States something that's worth doing at a time when some other commodities are having a tough time. It would be really important for the long-term prospects for shipments of LNG to have an easy pathway to their destinations in the Far East. So if that can occur, the natural gas production would be encouraged, would continue, and the price stability would be very beneficial, and the price stability in natural gas domestically would continue to support expansion of manufacturing, since especially down in places like Texas and Louisiana, industrial sites use natural gas for the heating of their gigantic plants and facilities, in addition to using it for other industrial purposes. So it can be supportive in many different ways.
Great, thank you for that. So shifting gears to, no pun intended, well, I guess no pun intended, to more on-road activities, are you seeing the major parcel carriers, the usual suspects, are making any additional push for either truckload or less than truckload shipping, or are they really staying close to the models that they have right now? Kathy, perhaps with your background, this is a good place to start with you.
Okay. Well, all three of them, the UPS, FedEx, DHL, what have you, there is that interest in LTL, natural extension provide, and don't see them making any extra push, but rather, as everyone's probably well aware, come the beginning of 2015, both UPS and FedEx are shifting to a dim weight model for their for all of their ground packages. UPS is out on their LTL model right now. It hasn't been rolled out to all yet. I see that occurring probably during the year. It sounds like it's being quite successful. But basically a matter of sticking to their basics is possible. And that's exactly what LTL is. It's just an extension of that, along with the larger freight at times.
Okay. Thank you for that. Albert, anything to add?
Well, I guess my thought is that, let's say, DHL has no interest whatsoever to get into any domestic activities or LTL after their really failed expansion on the parcel side. On FedEx's side, FedEx today already operates the fastest and probably most reliable LTL network in the United States. So I don't think there's any need for them to, expand dramatically. Simply, grow their business based on customer needs and requirements. And UPS themselves operates a large LTL network today. Probably not as the same quality than the FedEx freight network, but generally speaking, I don't see that they're going to focus much, growth in that area, other than maybe fine-tuning margins, because LTL, parcel is such a high yield margin business for them that LTL and truckload can never come even fine-tune their existing networks to maybe make it more profitable, but I don't see major expansions.
Very interesting. Good points, Paul. Another shift that we've certainly seen, and I'm sure that'll be of interest to those listening. What trends are you seeing regarding outsourcing to, say, 3PL or 4PLs, or are you seeing a movement away from that kind of outsourcing to bringing transportation management back in-house? Albert, why don't we start with you?
Alan, thanks. I wish I would have the crystal ball on that one because it is an ever-ongoing evolution. Overall, I don't see any major shifts. I see clients that I've done work with that are going towards an outsourcing model. Others that have outsourced, they are going back to an insourcing model. So it seems ever evolving. So, and I think that's probably part of this whole outsourced model is that you have to find the right mix, the right services, the right capabilities. And as companies evolve, maybe they grow. And at that point, an outsourced model is not as attractive as insourcing it again. On my part, I think there's pros and cons to both, and definitely not the one-size-fits-all solution and therefore answer for this.
Very good point. And Kathy, over to you with a question of whether you're seeing any differences, both in terms of the trends in different geographies that you observe.
Well, I totally agree. I think it depends whether it's a particular industry or a particular need. As in various industries, again, going back to pharmaceuticals, there's a special way of handling goods and such. So you may want to keep that in-house. A good many pharmaceutical companies do, whereas others are more open to outsourcing. It just depends. When it don't forget the whole dedicated contract carriage. I'm seeing a lot more interest in that here domestically, just because of the shortage of drivers. Lock in on a particular contract such as that, as well as the use of PLs. That whole outsourcing thing, again, when there's any type of a supply chain disruption, any type of rumblings, shippers are going to start looking, trying to look for transportation. They're going to go to the 3PL, such as an XPO or what have you, to find that type of service that need. I think in a tight market, trucking in particular, the use of the dedicated contract carriage, the use of 3PLs, trying to fill that void. Now, as far as Europe and Asia goes, it's almost a similar situation. Europe is more conducive to outsourcing than the U.S. is, and Asia is a little bit wanting to keep it all in-house, particularly with the e-commerce providers, such as JD.com. They've created their own logistics and transportation services because service levels there in China. It's just too sporadic.
Great, interesting. Thank you very much for that. So I'd like to finish up with asking you, Albert, in spite of your hesitations, to pull up your crystal ball a little bit. And for those listening to this session, what would you say to U.S.-based shippers in particular, though I suppose we could extend this to others as well, based on the outlook for 2015, what are the things that you would advise them to pay the most attention to going into the new year?
Okay, my crystal ball, Alan, would look at, firstly, keep a very close eye on drivers, the driver shortage, your domestic transportation, everything hinges around that truck, and so that will be a continued challenge, and I think shippers need to be willing to pay more for better service to get that out of that challenge. And then the other item would be really the capacity constraints at the ports. Not all ports, but the majority ports in the United States right now, where we are seeing significant delays, additional fees and charges related to those. And those things are not easily resolved. So those would be my two biggest challenges for 2015. That shippers should really need to start planning and focusing around.
Great, thank you. Kathy, what are your thoughts? What's your advice to shippers for 2015?
Well, I would say to be open-minded and to be willing to think out of the box, because with the global economic situation the way it is, it's going to take creative thinking on behalf of shippers as well as logistics providers. Think of the shifting trade lanes, the needs of emerging markets. Emerging markets have gotten a really bad rap in the press over the past year or so. They're growing, and there is a great opportunity. So I think the creativity, just being agile alone, will serve shippers in this crazy environment we're operating in.
Okay, great. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Hastings, what's your advice for our shipping public?
We would recommend to be prepared for a slowdown in total aggregate volume. That's a risk that's starting to come together for 2015. And you can see some of that as a continuation of the problem that I described before, where the demand for total volume and size and weight of things starts to come down. Historically, and then as the commodity prices come down, those are usually associated with a bit of a slowdown. So in 2015, everything associated with the movement of goods needs to be prepared for the risk of a slowdown in total volume. So 2015 is where you want to start to utilize solutions, optimization, more software, more consulting. I'm not selling anything. I don't have anything to sell, but that's what you have to have. You have to either have your own vast set of tools, or you've got to go out and get more, because when things start to change, that's when you have to start out analyzing the competition, and you got to do it fast. So even though right now you're starting to look at an environment where the fuel cost is coming down, what may very well be coming next is a decline in the total volume, and that's really not that uncommon. If you get a big breakdown in fuel prices like this, very often they're associated with some sort of a decline in aggregate demand. Sometimes they're very small events that are brief and shallow, and sometimes they're bigger and longer, and that's not clear yet. We are concerned that it could be a decline in activity. We are concerned about that. We're not yet forecasting that explicitly, but we are becoming more concerned because of what we're seeing in the commodity markets. So what you do in the industry is just get ready with more optimization, more software, more tools, more variables analysis, and you need tools to do that. You need experts and help to do that. That's what works. We saw that, when I used to monitor the retailing industry, starting about, it was really more than 10 years ago, really 10 and 15 years ago, the business started to change and retailers started to adopt IT solutions really ahead of many other industries, and that really helped them to get through a lot of turmoil that came when fuel prices went way, way up. Then gradually other industries started to adopt more sophisticated solutions, and that is what it takes. So if you do that and start to focus right now about being prepared for optimization, then you'll get through this big change that may be occurring during 2015. I'll turn it back to you, Alan.
Well, thank you, all three of you, for your tremendous insights and what I hope is a great deal of guidance for our audience. Thank you all for listening to this roundtable. For more information, again, you can reach us at www.besttransport.com. And thank you all for this. We'll be sharing the audio as we go along in the coming year. Thank you so much.